this one is so detached and delusional that she actually praises my father while trying to trash his daughter.
Yeah, we had Laila Ali, but I kind of feel like God wants me to be like the next Muhammad Ali, because I kind of feel like God wants me to be like the next Muhammad Ali.
What if everything you've been hearing about Claressa Shields only scratches the surface? Over the past few weeks, debates surrounding her career have exploded across social media, with fans arguing over her next opponent, her weight class, and whether she's truly living up to the title of the greatest woman of all time. But as I dug deeper into interviews, public statements, and even personal writings connected to Claressa's life, I realized this conversation isn't just about boxing anymore. It's about the choices she's made throughout her career, the people who've influenced her, and the patterns that continue to follow her wherever she goes. By the end of this video, you'll have a completely different perspective on why Claressa continues to find herself at the center of controversy, and why many people believe the biggest battle she's fighting isn't inside the ring at all.
Real talk. Y'all, this beef juicy just like... Well, I have to lose 20 pounds right now. It was 20, now it's less, but I have to lose weight for this fight. And y'all all know that when fighters have to go down, sometimes they lose power. Sometimes they lose their quickness, or it's always something that changes when fighters have to go down.
Now, before we go any further, I want to make something clear. This isn't about attacking Claressa Shields or denying everything she's accomplished. There's no question that she's built one of the most decorated resumes in women's boxing. Olympic gold medals, multiple world championships, and achievements that very few fighters will ever match have cemented her place in the sport's history. But being a great athlete doesn't make someone immune from criticism, and lately the criticism has been louder than ever. Instead of celebrating another fight announcement, many fans immediately started asking difficult questions. Why this opponent? Why now? And perhaps the biggest question of them all, why does the conversation about Claressa always seem to circle back to weight? That question became even more interesting after Claressa herself acknowledged how difficult it has been to cut weight for this upcoming fight. Anyone who follows boxing knows that dropping weight isn't as simple as eating less. Fighters often sacrifice power, stamina, and even their reaction speed just to make the number on the scale. Some athletes never look the same once they move down a division, and that's a legitimate concern. But for many fans, that explanation wasn't enough. Instead, it reignited a debate that's been building for years. If Claressa truly believes she's the greatest female boxer of all time, why are so many people still waiting to see her consistently compete against the biggest names in the divisions below her? Is the challenge simply too difficult physically, or is there another reason behind those decisions? This debate becomes even more complicated when you compare it to comments made years ago by boxing legend Laila Ali. Long before today's controversy, Laila publicly shared advice she claimed was meant to help Claressa's career. According to Laila, moving closer to the middle divisions would open the door to more competitive fights and bigger opportunities. She also suggested improving nutrition and getting into even better athletic condition to maximize her potential. On paper, that sounds like the kind of advice an experienced champion would naturally offer to someone following a similar path. But instead of strengthening the relationship between the two women, it had the opposite effect. What could have been mentorship slowly turned into one of the most talked about rivalries in women's boxing. Years later, both women continue to tell very different versions of what happened. Claressa believes she wasn't supported the way she should have been, and has often suggested that jealousy played a role in the tension. Laila, on the other hand, insists she was simply trying to help, and that her comments were never intended as personal attacks. Fans have spent years choosing sides, with some believing Claressa's interpretation and others agreeing with Laila's explanation. But regardless of who you believe, one thing stands out. This wasn't an isolated disagreement. It became another example of a pattern that many critics say follows Claressa throughout her career. Time after time, relationships that begin positively eventually seem to end in conflict. Of course, supporters of Claressa would argue that champions often attract criticism because success makes people uncomfortable. Every dominant athlete eventually reaches a point where every decision is questioned and every statement becomes headline news. That's certainly true to some extent. However, critics believe there's something different happening here. They point to repeated public arguments with fellow fighters, social media disputes, and ongoing disagreements with people who were once considered allies. From their perspective, these incidents aren't random, they are connected. That idea became even more interesting when another content creator highlighted portions of a personal letter Claressa had written about her childhood and her journey into boxing. Unlike interviews or promotional appearances, these writings offered a much more personal glimpse into the experiences that shaped her long before she became a world champion. Suddenly, people weren't just discussing wins and losses anymore. They were trying to understand the person behind the gloves. As I started reading through those details, one thing became impossible to ignore. Many of the experiences Claressa described seemed to explain why certain topics, especially criticism about her weight, her career decisions, and comparisons to other fighters, appeared to trigger such strong emotional reactions today. Whether those interpretations are fair is ultimately up to each viewer to decide. But once you hear the story of how Claressa Shields first entered boxing, the role her father played in introducing her to legends like Muhammad Ali and Laila Ali, and the unexpected path that eventually pushed her into competing at a much heavier weight than her natural size, the entire conversation begins to look very different. And that's where this story takes an unexpected turn, because the deeper you go into Claressa Shields' own words, the more you realize this controversy may have started years before she ever became a world champion. In the next part, we'll break down the personal experiences that many people believe shaped her competitive mindset, her relationships with those around her, and why the issue of weight continues to follow her career even today. To understand why this debate has become so emotional, we have to go back to the beginning of Claressa Shields' story. Long before she was standing on podiums with Olympic gold medals around her neck, she was a young girl growing up in a difficult environment where stability wasn't always guaranteed. According to information that has resurfaced online, Claressa's father spent much of her early childhood in prison, meaning she grew up without one of the biggest influences a child can have during those formative years. When he was eventually released, he introduced her to stories about Muhammad Ali and his daughter Laila Ali, who had already become one of the most recognizable names in women's boxing. For a young girl searching for direction, those stories weren't just inspirational, they showed her what was possible. They planted the idea that boxing could become more than a hobby. It could become a way to change her life forever. Ironically, despite introducing her to the sport, her father reportedly wasn't immediately supportive of the idea. He initially believed boxing was a man's sport and wasn't something his daughter should pursue. Eventually, he changed his mind and paid for her first year of boxing lessons, opening the door to what would become an extraordinary career. But many people believe that brief period of encouragement had a lasting impact. Some argue that Claressa wasn't just chasing championships, she was chasing the approval and validation that every child naturally wants from a parent. Whether that's true or not is impossible to know for certain, but it's a perspective that has led many to look at her career through a different lens. As Claressa's talent became more obvious, another influential figure entered her life, her trainer, Jason Crutchfield. According to Claressa's own writings, Jason saw greatness in her before she saw it in herself. At the time, she weighed around 138 pounds, yet there were only a handful of Olympic weight classes available for women. Instead of competing closer to her natural size, Jason believed her best opportunity would come by moving all the way up to the 165-pound division. To most people, that idea sounded almost impossible. Gaining nearly 30 pounds to compete against naturally bigger athletes wasn't the obvious path to success. But Jason believed it was the path that would give her the greatest chance to make history. Looking back, it's hard to argue with the results, because Claressa did exactly that, becoming the first American woman to win Olympic gold in boxing. However, that decision may have created consequences no one anticipated at the time. Critics now point out that Claressa built her entire career competing at heavier weights than where she originally started. Over the years, her body adapted to those divisions, and as time passed, moving back down became increasingly difficult. That context has caused many fans to revisit the criticism Laila Ali offered years ago. Was Laila simply suggesting that Claressa return closer to the weight she naturally belonged in? Or was it advice that became impossible to accept because it challenged the path that had already defined her success? It's a question that continues to divide boxing fans, and there isn't a simple answer.